Hi, good morning everyone. I wanted to make a quick video about the dominant function. I've heard people talk about the dominant function as their preference, as their favorite function, as the function they use the most. I've heard it described in lots of ways. I've heard the dominant function described as the filter of which you see the world, your dominant function, because the word dominant actually has a definition. But okay, I wanted to throw out there another way to look at it if maybe you're confused about if you're like an ENFJ or an INFJ, or if you're ENFP or INFP and you're just like not sure what your first function is. I just sort of ruined the surprise. What I was going to say is that really how you should look at it is, what do you do first? And I know this isn't really that mind-blowing of an idea. It's not like I just came up with this. Like, the actual theory of both socionics and Myers-Briggs and Carl Jung's cognitive functions, all of it together, when you think about your dominant, auxiliary, tertiary, and inferior, we all know that there's an order here, right? But I don't think there's enough stress, and what I'm trying to stress now is that your dominant function really is just, what do you do first? What sets off the rest of your personality in motion? You might not feel like it is your dominant all the time. You might not feel like it might be confusing to you to think about it as, what do I use the most? Because I think that whenever we are in the flow of life and whenever we are truly ourselves and we're truly happy, then what happens is it's like a domino effect. It goes from the first, second, third, fourth function. Like it works like that, all in one. And that's why whenever you're super healthy and in a good spot, you are very compatible with your dual in socionics, which is the person with the absolute opposite functions of you. So for example, me as an ENFJ would get along well with an ISTP whenever we are both in a good spot, because I would go like boom, 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 go through FE, then NI, then SE, then TI, and then I will have like a conclusion about something. And if they have gone through that same process but reverse, then that's going to be a very fascinating discussion if we're using the same functions. But sometimes people loop from their first to their third. Sometimes people just stick and are stuck on their dominant. And for those people, it's very easy to know what your dominant function is if you're using your dominant function way too much. But I think that a lot of people, if you're going through some sort of a awakening or a growth spurt, or especially if you're like in high school thinking about, what do I want to do after graduation, or if you're in college thinking about what do I want to do for a career, or even if you're like still, a lot of millennials have like an extended adolescence, like all the way up to 30 these days. If you're like 20 something, a lot of that period of life, like young adulthood-ish, is very focused on the auxiliary function, and that's kind of when it starts to blossom. And so I think that a lot of people mistype, because they'll be like, well, I was more introverted as a kid, but now I'm a lot more social. And so, but that's really just because they're experiencing their auxiliary function sort of for the first time in those few years. And I know for me as an extrovert, I'm feeling a lot more introverted than I ever really have been, because I'm using my NI to really set my life on track and stuff like that, because I kind of have to. I mean, I have to build a foundation. I have to think about what my career is going to look like. Like, do I ever want to settle down? Like, what sort of city do I want to live in? Like, all these questions, I'm sort of forced to use more NI. And that sort of happens with whatever personality type you are. You're going to have to use your second function a little more, because it's that balance of looking outward and then inward If you're an extrovert, you look outward and then inward. But if you're an introvert, you look inward then outward. It's like that sort of back and forth of outward, inward, trying to decide what to do. Like, that's like when you're using your auxiliary, or you're not auxiliary. That's when you're using your second, auxiliary, sorry. That's when you're using your auxiliary function the most, is when you're trying to, like, make a decision or, like, figure out who am I and things like that. So if you're, like, in that spot, then it might be hard to know, like, what function do you use the most, if you're using other functions a lot too. So yeah, if you think about it as what starts off the spiral, what sets you off, what is your, like, launch pad, I think that's a really good way to think about what the dominant function is. It's your first function. And no matter how mature you are, no matter how immature you are, no matter what you're going through, no matter what job you have, no matter what is going on in your life, your dominant function is still going to be first. So even if you are going through a hard time, you're grieving a relationship or a loved one or something, you might be in the grip and use your fourth function more, or you might be on your shadow side and using your fifth and sixth function, which is the opposite of your dominant. So for me, as an ENFJ, my dominant function is FE, and my shadow function is introverted feeling, my shadow side. I might be using more FI, or my inferior TI, if I'm sad or going through something. But even if I'm using those functions that aren't necessarily natural, I'm still going to start the process off with FE, because I'm an ENFJ, because FE is my first. And so if you're not sure what your type is, this could be one way to look at it, is what starts your processing, what is your go-to function. And so yeah, I think that, I've said before in other videos that most of the type descriptions are based off of, if there's like a bell curve of behavior of each archetype, most of the function descriptions is describing the middle of the bell curve, the average Joe sort of person. Like, most ENFJs act like this, like the middle of the bell curve, but it doesn't account for outliers very well, because it's not really describing the root of the behavior. Most of the type descriptions you'll see online, it's describing the symptoms and the commonalities that the middle of the bell curve has. It doesn't account for if you're going through a hard time, if you have a job that is abnormal to what your type would feel like they want to do the most. I don't know, like if you're an ENFJ and your job is making you crunch numbers in a spreadsheet, that's going to be forcing you to use more TE and SI. That's not going to be necessarily how your brain would prefer to process. But yeah, no matter where you are in the bell curve, no matter what is going on, you're not an ambivert, you're not back and forth between two types. One of the functions is your dominant function, and your dominant function is your first function, and it is your launch pad for the rest of everything else that you're capable of doing. Thank you for watching.